Chapter 846. When Saint came to the third floor of the hospital, several doctors in white were talking and walking out of the corridor. They met face to face. The doctors raised their hands and saluted subconsciously. They were not doctors of this sanatorium, but professors from the private hospital of the giant group. They were all senior military doctors with strong military habits. Saint waved his hand casually. "We meet several times a day. Don't be so polite. How's the situation?" "Overall, it's good." The leading doctor smiled bitterly. He said nice words, but there was distress in his voice. His Highness's fingers moved once 2 months ago. During this time, we paid close attention to his physical condition and recorded detailed data. His Highness's physical data has been changing in a good direction, but the speed is very slow. Judging from the current peak data, it will take a long time for him to wake up. The doctor paused and said cautiously, "Maybe it's a long time that we can't even speculate." Saint furrowed his brows tightly. He was not surprised by this result. But every time he heard it, he felt a little annoyed. He had also seen the detailed data recorded by the doctors. In his opinion, the data that represented the physical condition was completely messy. Some of them were higher than others, and some were lower than others. Countless data, which could even represent the recovery of various organs of the human body, were placed in front of him like a heavenly book. "Which aspect of the data you mentioned is the most serious?" Saint asked. "It's serious in all aspects." The doctor looked serious. "But the most serious is His Highness's brainwave. His brainwave value is very low, and it grows very slowly. Sometimes it is even in a state of decline. From this point of view, His Highness probably doesn't want to wake up." Saint suddenly fell silent. Was he disheartened? He had loved a person for many years, and they had been apart for many years. He missed her day and night. He tossed and turned, longed and waited countless times, and every day felt like a year. The unimaginably heavy and majestic emotion accumulated in his heart day after day, and he carried it on his back, year after year. The last time they met, he watched her die in front of him, burning and turning into ashes. He didn't even say a word. What was despair? Maybe he was really desperate at that time. Saint was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "I understand." The doctors instinctively saluted again and walked past him while discussing among themselves. Saint hesitated for a moment, but still continued to move forward. The third floor of the hospital wasn't big, and there weren't many injured people living there, such as Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi, Black Tortoise Li Wangsheng, and Vermilion Bird Yi. As time passed, more and more people were discharged from the third floor, and now there was only one person left on the third floor. He had been in a coma for almost 2 years, and he had only managed to move his fingers 2 months ago. Saint came to the ward and pushed the door open. The man who was once recognized as the strongest assassin in the entire dark world and even dared to fight against the real heavenly sun was lying on the sickbed, breathing weakly and lifelessly. Situ Tsangua sat by the side of the bed, holding a comb to gently comb his hair. She calmly looked at her unconscious little brother, her expression so gentle it made one's heart ache. Lu Yun, the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau, stood aside and watched this scene motionlessly like a statue. Upon seeing Saint enter, Lu Yun moved his body and nodded. He said softly, "Your Highness." Saint patted him on the shoulder and looked at Tribulation lying on the bed. Looking at Tribulation, who was lying on the bed, she whispered, "I just met the doctor and asked him. He's recovering well, at least getting better. Although it's been a long time, there's still hope for him to recover." Situ Tsangua nodded and said softly, "What's the matter?" Saint hesitated and shook his head. "Nothing." Situ Tsangua glanced at him with some doubts, but she didn't ask much. She just said, "When do we set off?" "Set off?" Saint raised his eyebrows. "To the desert." Situ Tsangua spat out 3 words with a calm and indifferent expression. The blockade of the desert prison by the Beijiang military region had become the biggest news in Jianghu state. Ordinary people didn't know, but people with certain information channels knew what it meant. The blockade this time might not be the key to the next election and the game with Beihai, but it was enough to determine the position of Emperor Dong's palace in this revolution. As long as Emperor Dong's palace could break through the blockade, whether from inside to outside or from outside to inside, once Li Tianlan got in touch with Emperor Dong's palace, their cooperation with the Wang family of Beihai would officially begin. If the blockade remained unmoved, Beihai would lose allies like the giant group and Emperor Dong's palace. At least they would first lose Li Tianlan, a main combat force. Moreover, if the blockade was not broken, the giant group would have many scruples in the cooperation with the southeast group. Situ Xianxia certainly understood this. She didn't want to comment on Li Tianlan's choice. In her opinion, there was nothing wrong with letting Emperor Dong's palace replace Kunlun City, but there was nothing wrong with letting Emperor Dong's palace become the second Wang family of Beihai. It was just that the choice was different. She knew very well that after Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqing visited Li Tianlan in person, Li Tianlan showed his intention to cooperate with Beihai. In the eyes of the two giants, it was undoubtedly a betrayal. Once Chen Fangqing really took over Beihai, how good would the end of Emperor Dong's palace be? The most important thing at the moment was to break the blockade of the Beijiang military region. Today, Emperor Dong's palace could come up with a very good lineup. But if they wanted to concentrate the greatest combat force, then she and Saint would naturally be the most luxurious lineup. It was also the lineup with the most confidence to break through the blockade. Saint glanced at Situ Xianxia. His eyes were a little strange. What's wrong? Situ Xianxia frowned slightly. So, you haven't received a call from someone from beginning to end? Saint seemed to have understood something. No one could deny that Situ Xianxia cared about Li Tianlan very much. But after all, she was the governor of Sai City. Situ Xianxia was not an irresponsible person. If she had received a call from someone, at this moment, it would be impossible for her to go to the desert without any worries. Who called? Situ Xianxia was a little confused. Chen Fangqing. Saint shook his mobile phone and said with a poker face, 10 minutes ago. He just called me, and his tone was very tough. Situ Xianxia suddenly narrowed her eyes. Her eyes were a little cold. Threatening you? Sort of. Saint smiled freely. He said that Mount Shu is the main part of the special warfare force of Jianghu State anyway. As the first senior brother of Mount Shu, I have the responsibility and obligation to take care of the interests of Jianghu State. Such a Mount Shu will not let people down. Listen, how interesting that is. It seems that I have to hand over my position in Mount Shu as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's really a grieving for me to be the deputy palace master. So, you agree? Situ Xianxua's voice was a little low. Saint fell silent and did not speak. Then I'll go by myself. Situ Xianxia stood up. The murderous weapon, setting sun, Saint said slowly, now it should be able to fire, right? Calculating the time, it should be about time. The face of Drifting Cloud, who had been silent, changed slightly. So what? Situ Xianxia sneered. No one knows setting sun better than I do. So I'm right. Setting sun can already exert its power, right? Saint narrowed his eyes. Situ Xianxia was silent for a while and said lightly, it doesn't matter. That's true. Saint nodded. But I don't think you should go to the desert now. You should go to Sai City. Situ Xianxia said with some doubts, I think I understand why Chen Fangqing called me. Saint laughed and said, he thinks I'm a pushover. Obviously, he doesn't want to provoke you, or he doesn't want to threaten you openly. But do you think others will turn a blind eye to the fact that you and I are here? Chen Fangqing can call me and threaten me with the whole Mount Shu. I have to compromise. How can he forget you? He doesn't threaten you, but it doesn't mean that he won't touch Sai City. Saint looked into Situ Xianxua's eyes and whispered, the dark world of Snow Country is now under the control of Wang Xiaoyao. Situ Xianxua's eyes suddenly changed. Sai City was on the border between Jianghu State and Snow Country. Chen Fengqing didn't need to call to threaten Situ Zhanyue. With Wang Xiaoyao, the power of Snow Country could keep Situ Zhanyue in Sai City. But, she thought of the sword he left in Sai City before he went to the desert, and there was a trace of hesitation in her eyes. As for the desert, you don't need to worry. Saint said lightly, Chen Fengqing doesn't know that even if he doesn't make this call, I won't go to the desert. Even without us, His Highness has a way to solve the blockade. No one can predict the future. Situ Zhanyue said seriously, now there are not only more than 40,000 troops in the blockade line, but also Gu Qianquan. Gu Qianquan may not be afraid, but how can Tianlan deal with an invincible realm expert, a murderous weapon, and a large number of troops? By strength. Saint said, there is no need to predict the future. As long as he has the strength to solve everything, there will be no accidents. You do have a lot of confidence in him. Situ Zhanyue shook her head. But you and I should both know the invincible realm very well. At this age, it is even impossible for Tianlan to enter the invincible realm in the next few years. At his age, his lack of physical strength is the most important problem. I believe that he can face Gu Qianquan, but I still say that no one knows setting sun better than me. She knew the operation mode of setting sun, the energy storage time of setting sun, and the power of setting Sunday. In the hands of an invincible realm expert, even if setting sun was not famous for its power, its instantaneous firing was equivalent to the full blow of a peak invincible realm expert. If Li Tianlan couldn't enter the invincible realm, how could he deal with the blow of the murderous weapon? A very strange light flashed in Saint's eyes. It seemed that every time he mentioned setting sun, there was something wrong with him. But Situ Zhanyue didn't notice it. She lowered her head, looked at her brother in a coma, and said calmly, I need a reason to convince me. Saint put the phone back in his pocket and said quietly, because I really want to see the legendary Ruthless. Chapter 847. Situ Zhanyue had never heard of Heartless. Just like in this era, most people didn't know the carefree nature of Beihai and the Lin clan. But Saint had seen stories about Heartless. Yes, what he saw and knew were just stories. They were close to legends. It was like the sword intent he had carefully studied. The legendary sword intent had become a little real in him, and it had made him enter the invincible realm. What about Heartless? Who is Heartless? Situ Zhanyue was a little stunned. At this moment, she recalled all the famous experts in the dark world, but found that she had never heard of this code name at all. As for the recluse, Situ Zhanyue had never been interested in this. This world was extremely cruel, but it was also extremely beautiful. It was full of temptation and warmth. How could there be a real recluse? He could enter the invincible realm and control the power at the peak level of the dark world, but he hid himself? He was not mysterious at all. He was a complete idiot. The Lin clan was also a recluse. But who didn't know the Lin clan among the top forces in the dark world? Who dared to provoke the Lin clan? The Lin clan had countless branches all over the world. Their greatest confidence came from the headquarters of the recluse Lin clan. His Majesty, who was extremely mysterious and low-key, also secretly accepted Moraid, Yagyu Kurumi, and others as disciples, and was planning the Battle of Beihai. People like Li Guangtu also knew of his existence. Whether he was an idler or a schemer, as long as one had the ability in life, he would inevitably have the responsibility and ambition to match his ability. How could it be so easy to be good to himself? Even if there were still nameless invincible realm experts in the dark world who had not been exposed, there were very few of them, and most of them were secretly hidden by the superpowers. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, in today's dark world, the invincible realm experts exposed to people were all invincible realm experts. Those who did not dare to show up could only be trash. It was impossible for trash to enter the invincible realm. Therefore, there was no so-called recluse invincible realm experts in the dark world now. So who was Heartless? This question was very simple, at least in Situ Zhanyue's view, because there was no trust crisis between her and Saint. However, Saint was stumped by such a simple question. Who was Heartless? Saint was silent for a long time, and then smiled bitterly. I don't know. He really did not know who Wu Qing was. In that messy story, there wasn't much cause and effect. It was like the reality that was right in front of them. All that was said was what happened. As for why it happened, perhaps the story would know, but the people who read the story would not. He only knew that Wu Qing had suddenly appeared by Donghuang's side and then became Donghuang's only bodyguard. You don't know? Situ Tsanyue's eyes were a little strange. She gently tilted her head and slightly opened her red lips. There was a little surprise and anger on her face, which had defeated the aging charm. It was so charming that it made people dizzy. I really don't know. Saint shifted his gaze subconsciously. That's not important. What's important is that Wu Qing is absolutely loyal, and his strength is far better than yours and mine. He had already guessed it in his heart. He combined it with the story and some of what Qin Weibai had told him before. However, he had not confirmed it, so it was naturally meaningless to say it out. Situ Tsanyue lowered her head thoughtfully. Governor, I suggest that you return to Sai City immediately. Actually, you don't have to worry. Don't forget that His Highness isn't the only one in the desert. Boss is there too. Saint said. Situ Tsanyue was slightly stunned and thought of Qin Weibai. She didn't know why. Although Li Tianlan was strong enough now, in her heart, she still felt more at ease when Qin Weibai was mentioned. Did she expect the current situation? Situ Tsanyue asked. Not really, but it's not completely unprepared. Saint said quietly, Boss once said that Wang Yuetong is very important. At the right time, we might as well release some false news to make the situation more chaotic. So, she also told you about Wu Qing? Situ Tsanyue asked. Saint thought for a moment. Although it was not the case, there seemed to be nothing wrong with it. He nodded his head and grunted in acknowledgement. Does she know Wu Qing's identity? Situ Tsanyue combed her hair. I don't know. Saint smiled. It doesn't matter. What matters is Wu Qing's position. He is Donghuang's bodyguard, and the only bodyguard around Donghuang. The Donghuang he was talking about was not the current Li Tianlan. In that era, there were many experts in Emperor Dong's palace, covering the sky and the sun. Donghuang's edge shrouded the whole dark world. In Emperor Dong's palace alone, there was more than one expert at the peak of the invincible realm. But only Wu Qing was qualified to be the only bodyguard around Donghuang. What kind of scene was that? In the end of that story, even the invincible chosen one would fail and die in her hands. But Wu Qing never had a defeat. Because of Wu Qing. The light slowly faded with heat and dryness. There was no wind tonight. The windless night in the desert was the best exquisite in the world. Boundless yellow sand. Endless starry sky. The stars were bright and the yellow sand was soft. The sky here was low and bright, looking desolate and empty. Xiao Mahai stood under the starry sky, feeling a little lonely. The night sky was beautiful. But he didn't like it very much. It was not because he was lonely. It was because it was difficult to lurk in such an environment. Not far away was the front line of the 43rd Army. Nearly 20,000 soldiers set up the first blockade line on the front line. About 10 miles away, an armored corps of 10,000 soldiers set up the second front line. 40 miles away, a semi-automatic artillery corps was the third line of defense. The outermost was the field corps. Yes, in one day, 4 lines of defense had been set up outside the desert prison. The fourth line of defense just arrived here 2 hours ago. It was a reinforced division of nearly 10,000 soldiers. The total size of the desert blockade line had officially exceeded 50,000 people. The determination of someone in the council had been revealed. Xiao Mahai looked at the lights in the distance that almost lit up the whole desert, his expression solemn. He was a smart man, but also a stupid man. There was no doubt about his loyalty to Li Tianlan. Because people like him, as long as they were sure that they had found an opportunity, they would not leave the slightest way for themselves. Li Tianlan had been in the desert for nearly 2 years. Xiao Mahai had done a lot of things, but it seemed that he had done nothing. He was the warden of the desert prison. But in the face of a prisoner, he gave up his dormitory and all his communication equipment. At the same time, he provided the most detailed information about the entire range of the desert prison, as well as some technical parameters of the Sky Arrow base and the Sky Eye base. Dongxing Wudi and Yi Dongxing had been here. Military counselor had been here. Li Beidian had also been here once. Qin Weibai had even lived here. This was the desert prison, the most strict and mysterious forbidden area in Jianghu state. But anyone who had something to do with Li Tianlan seemed to be able to treat this place as a hotel where they could come and go as they pleased. The small amount of funds in the desert every year was blatantly appropriated by Xiao Mahai in an almost extravagant manner. Birds and beasts, delicacies, famous cigarettes and wine. He even brought his daughter and sister here to serve Li Tianlan. He ignored the overt and covert warnings of Jianghu state, and did not care about the people who criticized him in the council. Even when Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqin came, he only cared about Li Tianlan and completely ignored the 2 giants who stood in the highest position in Jianghu state. He did everything he could to the real extreme. There was no way out. But he gained Li Tianlan's trust in the shortest time. True trust and even appreciation. As a result, he was given opportunities that countless generals of his rank, and even those with better backgrounds than him, could not get. A year later, as Li Tianlan left the prison, the General Staff Headquarters, the Navy Headquarters, the Army Headquarters, and the Blood Battalion. He could choose any of these extremely prominent positions. Of the 4 positions, except for the Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, which was the deputy, the other 3 were all real top leaders, which could be said to be the top positions with real power in the entire Jianghu state. This was enough to show how rich Li Tianlan was in return for him. But he did not want any of them. He really wanted to follow Li Tianlan and did not care about the so-called prominent positions at all. He often thought that the ancestors of the 7 sword-holding families above the clouds in Beihai must not have thought that their families would have today when they started their business with the chosen one of the Wang family of Beihai. Xiao Mahai occasionally thought about it and looked forward to it. He firmly believed that the chief butler of Emperor Dong's palace would be more prominent than the position promised to him by His Highness. Maybe not now, but definitely in the future. He cut off all his retreat routes and exchanged absolute loyalty for Li Tianlan's full trust. So until now, in the face of the vast army of more than 50,000 people and the invincible realm experts with murderous weapons, he still did not think about retreating, even though he knew that his chances of breaking out of the encirclement were slim. The blockade of more than 50,000 troops. If Li Tianlan was really locked here, Xiao Mahai could be sure that his end was doomed to be extremely miserable. Because after losing Li Tianlan, no one would let him go. So the army blockading the prison was not only Li Tianlan's business, but also Xiao Mahai's business. The greatest loyalty was nothing more than no matter what the problem was, as long as it was his boss's business, it would definitely be his business. So he did not think about retreating. In any case, he had to try his best to get out of here. Xiao Mahai took a deep breath and took a step forward. At the same time, Tiannan, Xianyuan City. In the night that came earlier than the desert. In front of the mountain-like castle of Emperor Dong's palace, a neat and uniform military formation had completed the formation. Silent, resolute, iron-blooded, piercingly cold, and sharp. This was a small army of less than 2,000 people, but at this moment, the spirit, energy, and spirit of the entire army seemed to have risen to the peak. They didn't move at all, but they seemed to have a sharpness that could shake the world. Yi Dongxing watched this scene quietly. This was the nightmare army of Emperor Dong's palace, which had become famous in Tiannan. And directly opposite the army, standing opposite the nearly 2,000 soldiers, was a row of young people. Yes, a row. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, Bai Yuming, Yi Huayu, Fairy Tale, Ning Qianqing guarded Xianyuan City. The elders of the Li family assisted Ning Qianqing in guarding Emperor Dong's palace. Du Hanin and Su Chu led the first group of elites of Emperor Dong's palace into Beihai. Others. all the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace, one by one. They turned out in full strength and pointed their weapons at the desert. This was the final attitude of Emperor Dong's palace, and it was also their sharpness that they had never concealed. Without reservation, they went all out and pressed forward. In the roar that spread through the night sky, a huge black shadow appeared in the night of Emperor Dong's palace. The black shadow gradually slowed down in the air. The large transport plane belonging to the Freedom Corps showed its full appearance in everyone's sight. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the transport plane in the air. An invisible flame of war seemed to be directly ignited in front of the castle of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Baidian glanced at Lin Yuxian. Other high-level officials were also looking at Lin Yuxian. Their positions were equal. But the Nightmare Army was the main force of Emperor Dong's palace in external combat. Lin Yuxian was the commander of the Nightmare Army. At this time, it was natural for him to give orders. The transport plane blocked the starlight and cast a large shadow in the night. Lin Yuxian raised his head. He slowly stretched out his palm. The space fluctuated slightly. A pseudo-domain similar to the invincible realm but not pure flickered for a moment and disappeared instantly. Crack! An incomparably clear and melodious sound of friction suddenly rang out. His palms seemed to hold something. In an instant, Lin Yuxian's aura rose wildly, and his whole person seemed to become a sharp and peerless long sword in an instant. The blue electric arc lingered in his hand. Lin Yuxian watched this scene quietly, as if he were looking at a half-step invincible realm expert in front of him. The shape of a long sword appeared in his hand. It was not one sword. It was two swords. Two sparkling and translucent scarlet long swords with an incomparably ferocious shape. The murderous aura rushed over. Lin Yuxian held two swords, looked ahead, and said calmly, "Nightmare Army, let's go." An earth-shattering roar responded to him. Kill. No matter who it was. There was only one kind of treatment for those who stood in front of them. Kill. No matter who it was. Lin Yuxian took a deep breath and looked down at the long swords in his hands. Almost everyone's eyes were attracted by the two strangely shaped scarlet long swords. Li Baidian's eyes flickered slightly, as if he was thinking. Others' eyes were a little blank. A little farther away, Yi Dongxing stared at the two swords in Lin Yuxian's hands, and his eyes were extremely complicated. The world had been reincarnated. The old things reincarnated. The time reincarnated. Among all the people present, except for Lin Yuxian, perhaps only he knew the two swords. It was hard to describe the excitement in Yi Dongxing's heart at this time. He took a deep breath, and his eyes seemed to be a little warm. Hundreds of years ago, these two swords had conquered nearly half of Beihai's territory, expanded Beihai's 80,000 square kilometers of land to today's 160,000 square kilometers, turned Beihai into Beihai province, and made the Wang family of Beihai the top power in the dark world. At that time, in that era, Mount Dibing, supported by these two swords, was really invincible and swept away everything. 300 years ago, in the unprecedented major crisis in Beihai, it was also these two swords that stabilized the foundation of Beihai province. That year, the heroic posture of the man named Li Shuxin holding two swords still shone in the history of the Wang family of Beihai. And now, 300 years later, Lin Yuxian, holding two swords, stood in Tiannan. He would go north into the desert. He would also go north into Beihai again. Yi Dongxing's body trembled a little, and his eyes were full of tears. The two swords that had been sealed for nearly 300 years were held in Lin Yuxian's hands, fierce and quiet. In that initial era, this was the sword of Beihai. But in that most glorious era, this was the sword of the ancestors of the Lin clan. In the initial era of the Li family more than 300 years ago, this was the sword of the ancestors of the Li family. In the final analysis, this was the sword of the ancestors of Zhuanyuantai. Two scarlet long swords. Divine punishment in the left hand. Divine punishment in the right hand. Chapter 848. The ghastly white light slowly swam across the boundless desert. It was the 11th hour since they entered the desert. At the forefront of the blockade, the formation of the 43rd Army was still neat, and the whole army was still in the highest alert state. Xiao Mahai approached the front cautiously, and his speed was getting slower and slower. His breathing was steady, almost without any ups and downs. One after another, subtle and almost imperceptible electric arcs covered his body. The space around him was slightly twisted, and he passed by groups of patrolling soldiers. The light in the distance shone over again. Xiao Mahai quietly glided to the left for a distance. He stood there motionlessly. A group of heavily armed soldiers walked past Xiao Mahai in silence. They held an amazingly bright flashlight in their hands, which shone in the direction of the depths of the desert from time to time, leaving white rays. The light in the distance shone on several soldiers passing by, paused for a while, and then continued to spread into the depths of the desert. Xiao Mahai was completely still. The light and darkness alternated, and there was a fine layer of sweat on his forehead. The light just now could have shone on him from a few meters away. He was not afraid of the soldiers close at hand, but he was most afraid of the light in the distance. This kind of light, which seemed to have a wide range of illumination, was not only used for illumination. More than 2,000 extremely delicate parts were installed inside the launcher. This was the latest technology developed by Jianghu State in recent years, codenamed Explorer. Even though the 43rd Army was one of the trump card armies of Jianghu State, explorers were not popular in the 43rd Army, and there were only 5 explorers in the whole army. The light of the Explorer contained a very special ray, which was harmless to ordinary people, but it could accurately detect the energy source. The so-called energy, when used in martial arts, meant different realms of martial arts. Ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm. Ice and fire, lightning and thunder, they were all energy. The ray inside the Explorer was extremely sensitive to all kinds of energy. Even if an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was in the strongest hiding state, he could not hide under the light of the Explorer. After many experiments, it was known that only a few experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and a half-step to the invincible realm could escape the energy detection of the Explorer. This also meant that even experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm could not approach the place with explorers quietly. The Explorer technology was a technology that all countries in the world coveted. It was also a technology that Jianghu State had always blocked. Even the Wang family of Beihai and the Beihai Corps were not equipped with explorers by Jianghu State. Even though North Sea had never given up on the pursuit of explorers, everyone could see the great strategic value of the Explorer. The most suitable place for this thing was the army. It was true that it couldn't perceive the energy above the half-step invincible realm. But in the army of thousands of soldiers and horses, without the main formation in groups, what trouble could a few masters make? Even in the invincible realm, there was a limit to his physical strength. He was still afraid of thousands or even more troops. Once the explorers started to equip themselves on a large scale, any army's defense would be impregnable. Xiao Mahai was at the peak of the invincible realm. However, he had never thought of himself as a powerhouse in this realm. At best, he could only say that he was not bad in this realm, belonging to the average combat power. He was not confident that he would not be discovered by the explorers, so he could only try his best to avoid the lights. That was why the process of breaking through the encirclement was extremely difficult and tense. Another beam of light shone from afar. The pale beam of light swept across the night sky. It was indescribably arrogant and domineering. Xiao Mahai's eyes darkened for a moment. He gritted his teeth and quietly approached the edge of the 43rd Army. Gu Qianxuan was on the edge of the 43rd Army. For some reason, as the supreme commander of this blockade operation, he did not put the command room in the center of the 43rd Army. Instead, he chose the edge position that did not seem to have any advantage. Ouyang Pengfei, the commander of the 43rd Army, sat opposite Gu Qianxuan and said in a steady voice, "Your Highness, it's getting late. Why don't you take a rest first? If something happens, the 43rd Army is not made of paper. It can still deal with it. I will contact your Highness in person." "No need. Gu Qianxuan waved his hand casually and smiled lightly. I didn't come here from Kunlun City to sleep. I understand, but, before Ouyang Pengfei finished speaking, Gu Qianxuan shook his head and said slowly, keep an eye on Li Tianlan tonight. I know very well who Li Tianlan is. The whole dark world knows very well who Qin Weibai is. Both of them are now in the desert prison. In the face of the blockade, how can they really swallow their anger? Hey, neither of the adulterous couple is willing to swallow their anger. They will definitely take action. Emperor Dong's palace has just been established and is developing rapidly. Do you know what's most important at this time? Ouyang Pengfei blinked and looked at the dense army outside the tent. He was somewhat at a loss. Momentum. Gu Qianxuan said lightly. His tone was very indifferent, but it gave people a feeling that he was gnashing his teeth. Perhaps he thought of the time when Kunlun City had just replaced the Li family's Huanyuantai. At that time, Kunlun City occupied the power center of the special warfare system of Jianghu State. With the strong support of the Prince Group, the entire Kunlun City developed at an almost explosive speed in all aspects. Kunlun City was high-spirited and looked down on the world. But it was also at that time that Wang Tianzong of the Wang family of Beihai returned from traveling in the polar region and successfully entered the Invincible Realm. The first thing he did when he returned to Mount Dibing was to challenge Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun had no reason to refuse. Even if he didn't want to agree, he really had no reason. He was the god of war of Jianghu State. No matter what opponent he faced, he couldn't avoid the fight. Otherwise, the whole Jianghu State would be very disappointed. He was the governor of Kunlun City. If he flinched, the whole special warfare system of Jianghu State would also be very uneasy. He entered the Invincible Realm earlier than Wang Tianzong, and his realm had been stable. He didn't think he would lose. Kunlun City was developing rapidly. If he didn't accept the challenge, it would undoubtedly lower his own momentum. Therefore, without any hesitation, Gu Xingyun went directly to Mount Dibing alone. He was full of lofty sentiments and momentum. That challenge could be said to be a golden age in that year, but it was not Gu Xingyun who achieved it. The whole challenge took 9 seconds. One sword. Gu Xingyun was seriously injured and couldn't get up. This was Wang Tianzong in that year. The Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai, which had been somewhat turbulent, seemed to have completely calmed down because of this sword. Kunlun City, which had been developing rapidly, also suffered an unimaginable setback because of this sword. It no longer had the vigor and momentum of a rising force. Not only Gu Xingyun, but even Gu Qianxuan couldn't help thinking that if Gu Xingyun had won or ended in a tie, Kunlun City and the Special Warfare Group today would have been far stronger than they were now. Gu Qianxuan followed Kunlun City all the way from a rising force. Now he saw an equally ambitious rising force. Naturally, he knew what Emperor Dong's palace needed most at this critical moment. To some extent, this blockade was just a beginning. From the beginning of the blockade action to the end of the game in Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace couldn't escape everyone's sight since it was involved. For Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace, this was the key. Whether they could soar or not depended on whether they could not retreat. Jianghu State was very strong, so were other forces. If Li Tianlan hid in the face of the blockade, many people might understand, but more people would be disappointed. For example, in the battle between Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong. Everyone thought that it was okay for Gu Xingyun to lose. After all, he was the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. But when he really lost, everyone could not help but be disappointed. That sword also stabilized the world's impression of the Wang family of Beihai. There were only 2 kinds of superpowers in the dark world. One was the Wang family of Beihai. The other was other forces. The situation that Emperor Dong's palace was facing now was no less critical than the battle that year. At this time, as long as not everyone in Emperor Dong's palace was a fool, they would definitely make the toughest response in the shortest time possible and completely stabilize the prestige of Emperor Dong's palace with one spurt of energy. This was also the reason why Gu Qianxuan chose this location for his command room. He expected Emperor Dong's palace to encounter an unprecedented setback in this critical period and to form an irreconcilable personal feud with Emperor Dong's palace on behalf of the prince group. He had a murderous weapon, a stable realm, and a strong combat capability. He had many advantages, but he still chose this place as the headquarters. There was no other reason. It was just because it was on the edge of the 43rd Army. If things really couldn't be done, this was the most suitable place to escape. Well, the most suitable place to retreat. For a whole day, Gu Qianxuan was waiting for the reaction of Emperor Dong's palace. The more time passed, the more nervous he became. Rest? It was impossible for him to rest at this time. He was almost sure that there would be news coming out tonight. Otherwise, as long as the blockade lasted for more than 24 hours, those who observed the reaction of Emperor Dong's palace would be disappointed. The ear-piercing ringtone of the phone suddenly rang. Gu Qianxuan, who had intended to pick up the teacup, suddenly shook his hand, and he lost his composure for a moment. He took a deep breath, glanced at Ouyang Feipeng, and did not speak. Ouyang Feipeng immediately answered the phone. The hurried sound in his ear suddenly exploded like thunder. It was Huang Tong, the commander of the Beijiang military region. An hour ago. Tiannan, Xianyuan City. 1,760 elites of the Nightmare Corps of Emperor Dong's palace boarded the large transport plane provided by the Freedom Corps. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, Bai Yuming, almost all the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace came out. Their destination was the desert prison. When the Nanyan military region of Jianghu state received the news and urgently sent fighter jets to intercept, the two large transport planes flying in the air did not hesitate and directly hit them. Of course, they did not hit them. But the two large transport planes just rushed out of the interception of the Nanyan military region and had now entered the sky above the southwest military region. In the face of the questioning of the southwest military region, there was only one response on the transport plane. No explanation was given. Maybe they couldn't remember, or maybe they didn't have time to think about it. We are soldiers of Jianghu state. In the military plane of Jianghu state, there is no place in Jianghu state that we can't go. Chapter 849. Ouyang Pengfei immediately conveyed the response of Emperor Dong's palace. To be exact, it was a response from Lin Yuxian, the commander of the Nightmare Legion. In the territory of Jianghu state, where couldn't the army of Jianghu state go? Gu Qianxuan's curse words were stuck in his throat. He wanted to say something, but he could not say anything. Because he thought of the nature of the Nightmare Legion. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary army could not go anywhere without receiving orders from the top. It could only stay in its own station and train. But that was a normal army under normal circumstances. But the Nightmare Legion was abnormal from the beginning. First of all, it was the foreign combat force of Emperor Dong's palace. Not to mention the special position of Emperor Dong's palace in the country, the Nightmare Legion was given great freedom since its establishment. In theory, the combat range of the Nightmare Legion was the world. It had the most simplified configuration, the most powerful mobility, and the most free combat style. All of this was specially approved by Dongqing Wudi. Even Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqing agreed to it. At that time, no one could think of today's situation. So it seemed to be a coincidence. But no one expected that this coincidence would become a sharp sword to break through the blockade. Now the sharp sword was unsheathed, and the sharpness from thousands of miles away was constantly approaching the desert. The full Nightmare Legion. The Emperor Dong's palace turned out in full strength. Gu Qianxuan could feel the determination and strength of Emperor Dong's palace in this news. Thousands of miles away, whether it was mountains or seas, plains or deserts, they moved forward without retreat. This was the spirit of the entire Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, Bai Yuming, Gu Qianxuan thought of those names. Gu Qianxuan's heart trembled slightly. He was very excited and also a little scared. He really expected countless important figures of Emperor Dong's palace to break through the blockade here. He would teach Emperor Dong's palace an unforgettable lesson in the cruelest way. Li Tianlan would hate him. But he acted under orders. Before the action, the blockade had been defined as a war by Chen Fangqing. So how much Li Tianlan hated him would be how much he hated the Prince Group and Chen Fangqing. The Prince Group and Kunlun City would be directly tied to the same boat. This period of time was enough for Gu Xingyun to get through the period of serious injury. When he recovered and entered the peak of the invincible realm, everything would be another story. But now, Nightmare Legion. The most powerful force of Emperor Dong's palace marched into the desert from the south with unparalleled power. All the important figures in Emperor Dong's palace that Gu Qianchuan could think of were here. He had a murderous weapon in his hand and tens of thousands of troops in front of him. There were also countless experts of Zhongzhou State lurking in the blockade line and more experts of Zhongzhou State rushing over. The Nightmare Legion could not get through. Gu Qianchuan was sure of this. He was even sure that if he gave the order, the Nightmare Army, including everyone in Emperor Dong's palace, would be annihilated here. What kind of scene would that be? The Nightmare Army was the strongest fighting force in Emperor Dong's palace. If all of them were destroyed here, most of the properties Li Tianlan had built since he entered the secular world would disappear, and Emperor Dong's palace would only exist in name. No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible for him to swallow it. This was not a game, nor was it a war. This was extermination. As long as he dared to make a move, Li Tianlan was destined to fight to the death with the Prince Group. At that time, even if he walked out of the desert, there would be no place for him in the vast Zhongzhou state. Treason. All of Li Tianlan's actions were predictable. At that time, the entire Prince Group would suffer heavy losses because of Li Tianlan's wrath. Zhongzhou State would have one more powerful enemy. Even without Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan still had the power to make a comeback. Once Li Tianlan resisted, Mount Shu, Sai City, Jade Pool, and the Border Control Corps would be shaken. In order to get rid of Li Tianlan, Zhongzhou State would inevitably rely more on Kunlun City. If Li Tianlan made a big enough scene, it was even possible for Zhongzhou State to give up the game with Beihai. At that time, Kunlun City could join forces with Beihai again. Li Honghe had died. This time, there was no room for compromise. The whole world would kill Li Tianlan together. Gu Qianchuan's eyes grew brighter and brighter, and he struggled more and more. He could really do all this with his current strength. But there was a premise. After burying most of the elites in Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, as the commander in the front line, could not escape, not to mention whether he could kill Chen Fangqing or not. If the murderous weapon did not kill Li Tianlan, Gu Qianchuan thought he could not live. Moreover, Li Tianlan also had a murderous weapon in his hand. The possibility of blocking the setting sun was not small. That was to say, he could do everything he imagined, but the premise was likely to be completely sacrificed his life. For Zhongzhou State. He shook his head subconsciously. But for Kunlun City? Gu Qianchuan was extremely painful. He could be sure that as long as he gave an order, Kunlun City could have an incomparably brilliant future. But such a future was almost impossible for him to see. Was there any meaning to such a future? Gu Qianchuan did not know. He really did not know whether it was meaningful or not for a while. He inadvertently found that with the response given by Emperor Dong's palace, he seemed to have stood at a crucial point, not only for Kunlun City, Zhongzhou State, and even the entire dark world. What the future would be like depended on his thoughts. Gu Qianchuan's facial muscles twitched fiercely. He looked at Ouyang Pengfei, who was silently observing him, narrowed his eyes, and suddenly asked, "If Nightmare Corps launches an attack on us, what will the attitude of the 43rd Army be?" Ouyang Pengfei smiled. His smile was without any emotion. "Your Highness is the commander of the entire blockade operation. The 43rd Army will completely obey Your Highness's orders." "Any orders?" Gu Qianchuan cursed in his heart. He stood up, no longer looking at Ouyang Pengfei's fake smile, and directly walked out of his command room. On one side was his own life, and on the other side was the future of his family. If it were 20 years ago, he would not hesitate to sacrifice himself to make Kunlun City go further. He also participated in the fierce battle to encircle and suppress Li Kuangtu. In fact, all the participants in that battle, including Gu Xingyun, who was already in the invincible realm at that time, had the idea of sacrificing themselves to help their families. Today, 20 years later, Gu Qianchuan had reached the invincible realm. He had stabilized his realm and even hoped to take a small step forward and stand at the peak of the dark world. But he had long lost the courage and perseverance of those years. He was afraid of death. But he also wanted the future of Kunlun City not to be shrouded by the shadow of the Li family. So now he was not thinking about whether he should do it or not. Instead, it was how to survive after doing it. The explorer's dazzling light shrouded his figure all the way forward. Gu Qianchuan's body suddenly stiffened slightly. He slowly raised his head. In front of him, dozens of meters away, a void space was slightly fluctuating. Electric arcs, subtle enough to hide from the perception of thunder-shocking realm experts, contracted slightly in that space. They were not conspicuous, but in Gu Qianchuan's eyes, they were more dazzling than the explorer's light. Gu Qianchuan narrowed his eyes and suddenly laughed. The domain belonging to the invincible realm was fully opened in an instant. The space was forcibly distorted and turned into a vacuum. The rapidly spreading domain instantly enveloped that space. Countless electric arcs suddenly flashed for a moment, and then were completely extinguished. Gu Qianchuan's gaze fell on Xiao Mahai, the warden of the desert prison, who could not control his body in the invincible realm. His body lost gravity and floated higher and higher. Gu Qianchuan took a step forward. He crossed the distance of dozens of meters with one step. He appeared beside Xiao Mahai. Xiao Mahai stopped struggling and let his body float in the air. In the vacuum domain, he could not speak or do anything. He just looked at Gu Qianchuan with dignified eyes, but his face was extremely calm. Gu Qianchuan hated such an expression. For nearly 2 years, he had the highest power in Kunlun City, so he naturally had to contact Emperor Dong's palace, which was still under the leadership of Kunlun City in name. He had seen Li Beidian, Ning Qiansheng, and many high-level officials in Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Mahai's calm expression was almost the same as theirs. He seemed to have never taken the so-called invincible realm and Kunlun City seriously. He was calm, with a kind of indifference that he was not afraid of anything. More than once, Gu Xingyin wondered who had given these people such courage. Li Tianlan? Looking at Xiao Mahai, who was struggling weakly in front of him, Gu Qianchuan's smile and eyes gradually became a little ferocious. That little bastard can give you courage, but now, who can save you? The domain of the invincible realm quickly shrank to the size of a person in the blink of an eye. The shrinking domain shrouded Xiao Mahai's body. He was still in an environment without gravity, rising 20 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters. His figure became smaller and smaller in Gu Qianchuan's eyes until it merged with the darkness. Gu Qianchuan snapped his fingers. Snap! There seemed to be a sound of breaking in the night. The domain, including Xiao Mahai's, was instantly broken. The frenzied power suppressed his body. In mid-air, Xiao Mahai's body fell madly, like a straight line. Bang! In the dull sound, Xiao Mahai's body directly fell at the feet of Gu Qianchuan. The soft ground of the desert and the physical quality of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm did not make him fall to death, but the huge impact shook his internal organs and seriously injured Xiao Mahai in an instant. A mouthful of scarlet blood sprayed from his mouth. He put his hands on the ground and tried to stand up. Gu Qianchuan came over and stepped on his head. Half of Xiao Mahai's head was directly stepped into the yellow sand by this powerful and heavy foot, stained with blood, which was shocking. Gu Qianchuan looked down at this scene and enjoyed it. He said with a smile, "It's so late. Where do you want to go?" About the divine retribution and divine punishment. This Motherf asterisk cur. I made a mistake. I have to admit that I really forgot that the divine punishment had been broken when I was in the polar region, and it was discovered after a few days. I can't change it. I sincerely apologize. This is a bug, but it's hard to fix. I'll try not to write these two swords in the future. In fact, I personally like them very much. Chapter 850. When he opened his eyes, the plane was still in the sky. The large cabin was full of people, and it was quiet. Lin Yuxian observed the comrades around him who were about to fight side by side. He breathed a sigh of relief and lowered his head to wipe the blade in his hand. Beihai, the Lin clan, and the Li family. These three families had always been the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the dark world for hundreds of years. No matter in which era, the supreme swordsman must come from these three places. For swordsmanship, the three families also had different understandings. Even the Li family, which was of the same origin as the Lin clan, had different emphasis on the same unique skill. Beihai valued momentum, the Li family valued intent, and the Lin clan valued state of mind most. Therefore, Lin Yuxian's meditation time had always been very short, but the effect had always been excellent. When the plane flew over the southwest province, he was the first to open his eyes after meditating before the war. His spirit reached its peak at the moment he opened his eyes. It was difficult to break through the blockade outside the desert. No one could deny this. Gu Qianxuan was an invincible realm expert with a murderous weapon. He was definitely not someone he could deal with now. Lin Yuxian was also clear about this. The possibility of breaking through the blockade was not high, but it did not mean that there were no variables. Lin Yuxian did not think that Jianghu state would be so determined to launch a war against Emperor Dong's palace. In a place he could not see, Dongqing Wudi and Qin Fangqing must have been at daggers drawn. The final result was still unknown. But once the action began, Lin Yuxian could not retreat at all. Blood stained the desert, and a large number of casualties were inevitable. Once the casualties reached a certain level, would Jianghu state call a stop? The second variable was the desert. Li Tianlan was still cultivating his sword. Lin Yuxian did not know how strong Li Tianlan was now. But if he could know that the prison was blocked, he would inevitably respond. At that time, they would cooperate from inside and outside. No matter how tight the blockade was, there would inevitably be some omissions. The third variable was the Wang family of Beihai. Blocking the desert prison meant that some people in the parliament would launch a real general attack on Beihai. The prison could not be blocked for too long, and Li Tianlan could not know the news for too long. The main purpose of Jianghu state blocking the prison was to make Mount Dibing lose a super heavyweight ally when dealing with the Wang family of Beihai. But before Li Tianlan broke through, Beihai would inevitably face the final battle. Beihai naturally understood this as well, so they would definitely take action during the lockdown operation. At this time, Lin Yuxian knew very well that his father, Lin Fengting, was playing in Beihai. This matter concerns Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai. Will my father take action? These 3 points might seem illusory, but the most important fourth point was the most realistic. No matter what, it was impossible for the officers and soldiers at the blockade line to defend to the end. Emperor Dong was no longer a nobody, and neither was Li Tianlan. The military order was for them to appear on the front lines, but among the tens of thousands of soldiers, perhaps no more than 30% of them actually dared to fight to the death. The Prince Group, the Special Warfare Group, all kinds of conflicts of interest, each with their own thoughts, their command and deployment in the state of war would inevitably have all kinds of problems. Although the number of the Nightmare Corps was small, they obeyed orders. Whether it was cohesion or average quality, they were far superior to the soldiers on the blockade line. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, the Snowdance Corps under Li Tianlan's command crossed the borders of several countries with thousands of troops a day ago and defeated enemies more than 10 times their own, which was praised as a miracle by the Dark World. Lin Yuxian also wanted to create such a miracle and let the whole Dark World know that Zhuanyuantai was about to open. It was revived in his hands. Lin Fengting's arm, which was wiping the sword edge, stopped and was in a daze. A bottle of ice-cold drink was passed to him. When it touched his skin, it refreshed his mind. Lin Fengting froze and took the drink subconsciously. The illusory sword intent enveloped Lin Fengting, and the surroundings became a space that isolated all sounds. Li Beidian flicked his fingers casually and said with a smile, "Are you in a daze?" "No." Feeling the surrounding great void sword intent, Lin Fengting could roughly judge Li Beidian's comprehensive strength. He took a deep look at him and laughed. "I'm thinking, if Xuanyuantai really appears from Zhongzhou State, what flag, or badge, should I use? What do you think of the old one?" "Not very good." "The old badge? The one from the Tianlan family? That's more representative of the Li family, isn't it?" Li Beidian shook his head disapprovingly. "Then we have to design a new one." Lin Yuxian nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I happen to know a designer." "That figure, oh, that professional level." "Tut, let's talk about it another day." Li Beidian laughed. "I don't believe in professional level. They don't know swords or what Xuanyuantai is. I want to design it myself." Lin Yuxian said. "With your sense of beauty that has been eaten by a dog?" Li Beidian looked contemptuous. "Get out." Lin Yuxian laughed and scolded. "Hey, you still don't admit it. What's the name of that girl?" "Qingwan. She has been chasing you, right? Aren't you attracted to such a beautiful girl? If you are the heir of the Lin clan, I can understand, but you are not now. Branch, do you understand? He's poor, but he has a good family background, looks, a good figure, a good education, a good talent, and you're poor, but you have a good family background, you have a good appearance, you have a good figure, you have a good figure, you have a good education, you have a good talent. Screw you." Lin Yuxian sat aside with a disgusted look. Li Beidian's face became serious. "You really don't want to think about it? Wu Qingwan is currently the most promising person to become one of us. She can break through the thunder-shocking realm at any time, and she is 2 years younger than you. You know what that means." Lin Yuxian did not speak but shook his head silently. Li Beidian sighed and said softly, "So I'm right. Your sense of beauty is really eaten by a dog." Lin Yuxian took a deep breath and did not speak. He waved his hand and directly dispersed the great void sword intent in front of him. The great void sword intent condensed again after dispersing. Li Beidian came over with a smile. "I say, what kind of girl do you like? I'll introduce you to one." "You can't." Lin Yuxian shook his head and said lightly. He had never felt that he liked anyone. But every time he mentioned the words such as his future partner, girlfriend, or wife, he would always think of a pair of firm and crystal eyes. That was in Huading 2 years ago. Before the maneuver of the 2 academies, when he and Li Tianlan seriously injured Gu Qianxuan and Gu Xingyun, the slim figure stood in front of Gu Xingyun without hesitation. Her eyes. He could not forget it. Lin Yuxian lowered his head and was silent for a long time before he murmured, "So beautiful." "Who?" Li Beidian was a little confused. If Tianlan didn't replace Kunlun City, Beihai would still be the same, Emperor Dong's palace would be in the south, and Mai Xuanyuantai would replace Kunlun City. What kind of scene would Zhongzhou State be at that time? Lin Yuxian suddenly asked. Li Beidian was stunned for a long time before he became serious. He said solemnly, "The best scene." Unfortunately, no one thought of it, or deliberately ignored it. Lin Yuxian said lightly, "But it doesn't matter. When we get through this, maybe we should talk about it." Li Beidian thought of the scene that Lin Yuxian said and was a little lost in thought for a moment. It was rare that he did not speak. The plane passed through the night and kept moving forward. On the way, the plane was flying. In the deep night, the luxury plane was about to arrive at an airport in the northwest of Zhongzhou State. His Majesty sat in the modified comfortable cabin and looked at the dark night outside the window. Suddenly, he said thoughtfully, "How much do you think Qin Weibai weighs in Li Tianlan's heart?" Moraid was stunned and did not speak. He did not understand love. The relationship between men and women always stayed at the most primitive stage. He had no wife and daughter, and he had never considered these. He thought that the answer he gave would not be correct. Maybe, it's more important than everything. Jianghu was silent for a long time before he said softly. More important than everything, His Majesty muttered these words to himself. He was a little lost in thought, and no one knew what he was thinking of. Why is it more important than everything? His Majesty suddenly asked. I can see the ambition in Li Tianlan's eyes. The country and the world he wants are all in it. Will a woman really be more important than everything in his heart? Moraid's face was a little strange. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He thought, how could you not know Li Tianlan? His Majesty glanced at him and did not explain anything. He really did not know Li Tianlan. In particular, he did not understand Qin Weibai's position in Li Tianlan's heart. Because if I were Li Tianlan, Qin Weibai's position in my heart would be more important than everything. Jiang Guochu said seriously. More important than the Jiang family of South America? His Majesty smiled faintly. But Jiang Guochu's answer was without hesitation. Yes, more important than the Jiang family of South America. His Majesty fell silent. She's worth it. Jiang Guochu said again. Ha, His Majesty sighed and did not speak. Your Majesty's question is very strange. Moraid suddenly said. Because I'm hesitating. His Majesty turned to look at the dark sky outside the window. I have a piece of news. If Qin Weibai is really more important than everything in Li Tianlan's heart, this news is enough to make Li Tianlan completely crazy. But I can't predict how crazy he will be. Maybe he will completely destroy the balance of the dark world today. So I've been thinking about whether to release the news or not. So Your Majesty hasn't decided whether to do this or not? Jiang Guochu asked. It's too intense. I don't like it. I prefer to do it step by step. His Majesty shook his head. But if there's no other way, it's not impossible to consider doing this. The plane dived and landed slowly. So we're here now. Go to a place with me. His Majesty narrowed his eyes and smiled softly. If this trip goes well and we can kill Li Tianlan with the help of the general trend of the dark world, that's the best. If not, he shook his head and laughed strangely again. That news, hee hee, haha. Chapter 851. Lin Fengting was easy to find. Being in Beihai province and not deliberately hiding his whereabouts, with the strength of Mount Dibbing, it was almost a matter of minutes to find a person in the whole province. He was fishing in Autumn Mountain. Autumn Mountain was not a tourist attraction in Beihai. The mountain was small and not high. There were not many things worth seeing. The only commendable thing was that there was a small reservoir on the mountain, which was not open to the public on weekdays. The water used to irrigate the flowers and plants on Mount Dibbing basically came from there. Qiu Shan was the neighbor of Mount Dibbing. It was more like a guard silently guarding Mount Dibbing. Lin Fengting's tour was really comprehensive. From autumn to winter. He visited all the places worth visiting in Beihai. After going around, he finally returned to the vicinity of Mount Dibbing. He liked Qiushan very much. He vaguely remembered the place where he fished for the first time when he was young. It was this small reservoir. He was still a child then. Beside him were Wang Tianzong and Li Kuangtu. In front of him were his father, Uncle Li, and Uncle Wang. 3 men capable of overturning the entire dark world were betting on whose fishing skills were better. 3 children are fighting. The winner could fish with the 3 adults. The loser was responsible for roasting the fish. At that time, it was Wang Tianzong who roasted fish most of the time, and Li Kuangtu always won. Lin Fengting would steal the fish that Li Kuangtu caught and put it in his father's basket when Li Kuangtu was not paying attention. During that season, the scenery of spring was gorgeous, and fresh flowers covered the mountains and plains. The adults, children, fishing rods, and water carried indifference and tranquility that seemed as if it didn't belong to the mortal world. In this season, the cold wind was blowing, and the snow was flying. The fishing rod was still there, and the reservoir was still there, but everything had changed. When Wang Xingxiao walked up to him, Lin Fengting was smiling. He seemed to be recalling something. His eyes were calm, but his smile was a little sad. Wang Xingxiao narrowed his eyes, hesitated for a moment, and did not speak. "Can you roast fish?" Lin Fengting suddenly asked. "Yes." Wang Xingxiao laughed and said, "Yuetong likes to eat fish very much. I learned how to eat it when I was a child. I haven't cooked for a while, but I think I haven't forgotten how to cook it. Keep it simple. Let me taste your cooking." Lin Fengting handed a small bag to Wang Xingxiao, which contained some chili, cumin, and other seasonings. Wang Xingxiao did not refuse and waved his hand casually. Flaming fingers. The snow-soaked branches became dry again. Wang Xingxiao started a fire and slowly peeled off all the fish scales. Lin Fengting watched all this quietly without saying a word. "Is there something on your mind, uncle?" Wang Xingxiao lowered his head and asked casually. "No." Lin Fengting said lightly, "I just feel that I'm a little pathetic." "Pathetic?" Wang Xingxiao raised his eyebrows. "Those who can't let go of the past are the most pitiful." Lin Fengting said indifferently, "I know this, but I can't let it go." "Isn't that even sadder?" Wang Xingxiao smiled bitterly and said nothing. "I was once friends with your father and Li Kuangtu, the best of friends." Lin Fengting said softly, "I only have 2 friends in my life, and they are them. So when the Li family was destroyed, your father and I were estranged. I didn't want to see him destroy the Li family, and I didn't want to see the Li family destroy him either. I was caught in the middle and wavered. In the end, it was just because I couldn't let it go." Wang Xingxiao grilled the fish carefully, sprinkling seasonings evenly. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "This time I walked through Beihai again, and I had a lot of feelings. Now that I'm back here, it's the beginning. That's where it all started. I never understood why my good brothers would suddenly become like this. I also didn't understand why they could just let it go so easily. Only now do I understand. Perhaps it's not letting it go, but there are some things, once done, there's no turning back." Lin Fengting laughed. "Many years ago, I met Tianzong here for the first time. Today, many years later, I'm back here to say goodbye to Beihai in the past. Maybe the Lin clan should make some changes in the future." Wang Xingxiao's face suddenly became serious. "Uncle, do you mean that the Lin clan wants to enter the secular world?" "It doesn't matter." Lin Fengting said quietly, "What's important is that Qin Fangqing is too intense. I approve of what you're doing now. A leader should act like a leader. When you stand in that position, the most important thing is to be able to tolerate others. In this regard, Li Huaqing is much better than Qin Fangqing. I understand their mentality and scruples, but I won't agree. After this incident, I can give them the balance that Zhongzhou state wants." Wang Xingxiao grilled the fish silently for a long time. The aroma of the barbecue spread on the snowy autumn mountain. Wang Xingxiao handed the first grilled fish to Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting did not take it. He said with a smile, "Your cooking is worse than your father's. Can my father grill fish, too?" Wang Xingxiao was a little surprised. "My mother used to cook it. It was delicious." "Ah, I forgot." Lin Fengting was a little absent-minded. He hasn't done this for many years. On Autumn Mountain many years ago, when the 3 children became 4, the adults were still fishing, and the children were still fighting. As for the girl who joined them, now that he thought about it carefully, the number of times she won and the number of times she lost seemed to be the same. Lin Fengting smiled and stood up. He did not take the grilled fish from Wang Xingxiao's hand. It smelled delicious, but in his opinion, it had no taste. "Let's go," he said. "Uncle, please wait." Wang Xingxiao stood up with the fish. Lin Fengting paused and turned back to look at Wang Xingxiao. "Uncle, what do you think about the blockade of the desert?" Wang Xingxiao asked seriously. This should be your concern. Jianghu state has blocked the desert and intends to trap Tianlan. Their general attack on Beihai is about to begin. It's a place of trouble. It's meaningless for me to stay here. He had never intended to get involved in this matter from the beginning. This was a matter between Jianghu state and Beihai. No matter who won or lost, he only intended to look on coldly. It was impossible for him to intervene in this matter. Because the Lin clan would make some changes in the future. Because of the new balance. He had to give a relatively clear attitude. I won't beg you to stay in Mount Dibbing, but I hope you can do me a favor. Wang Xingxiao said. Lin Fengting made a sound, neither too light nor too heavy. I hope you can go to the desert. I don't think it's necessary for the desert prison to be blocked. After all, this is a matter between me, Li Tianlan, and Jianghu state. Beihai is facing not only a war but also a feast. Emperor Dong's palace should not be absent. Wang Xingxiao said blandly. Lin Fengting smiled and was silent for a long time. I need a reason. He said quietly. This reason was not persuaded by Wang Xingxiao. It was a reason for him to avoid the hostility of Jianghu state. Thinking of what he had just said, Wang Xingxiao seemed to understand something and said in a deep voice, Qin Weibai is the best reason. Qin Weibai was, the patriarch of the Lin clan was now blocked in the desert. This was indeed the best reason. Lin Fengting smiled and nodded. Let's go. He slowly turned around, and his figure suddenly disappeared in front of Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao watched him leave and didn't speak for a long time. In the slight sound of footsteps, the figure of the enchantress came from the depths of the forest and said respectfully, Patriarch, did he agree? He has no reason to refuse. Wang Xingxiao said softly, whether for the Lin clan or for Emperor Dong's palace, he will go. Asking Lin Fengting to break through the blockade of the desert prison. This was Wang Xingxiao's action. As soon as he made a move, it was almost a real fatal move. Of course, he knew that Jianghu state's general attack on Beihai was about to begin. At this time, he didn't intend to waste any time, nor did he want to make unnecessary tests. Now that they had officially fallen out, he would go all out in every move he made. The blockade of the desert prison couldn't stop Lin Fengting. Even if Lin Fengting was seriously injured, he was still worthy of being the top expert in the dark world. As long as he wanted to. No invincible realm expert or murderous weapon could stop him. Beijiang. Gaomi City. In the deep night, an ordinary-looking black car slowly stopped in a villa area that looked like it had been around for a long time. His Majesty, who had traveled from Europe to the airport and then went straight from the airport to here, looked at the mostly silent lights in the villa area, narrowed his eyes, and smiled. It's probably here. What is this place? Moraid looked at the villa area outside the window and was a little surprised. Who knows? His Majesty's voice was soft. Maybe it's a place that can change this era. Get out of the car. He pushed the door open. Moraid and Jiang Guochu followed behind him, one on the left and one on the right, looking around curiously. A domain that was vaguely similar to starlight spread over and completely enveloped the two of them. The figures of the three of them suddenly disappeared into the night. The three of them walked slowly under the eyes of the security guards at the entrance of the villa area. After searching for a while in the not-so-small villa area, they found a detached villa in the corner that would not attract anyone's attention. Number 17, it's here. His Majesty said softly. Should we knock on the door? Moraid asked. No need. His Majesty shook his head, walked into the courtyard of the villa, and waved his hand. Crack. With a slight sound, the entire door of the villa instantly turned into countless powder and scattered in the night sky. The first thing that appeared in Moraid's eyes was a pair of ladies' underwear that looked very pure but seemed to be fished out of the water. Moraid's expression was a little strange. There were scattered clothes everywhere in the villa. From the porch to the living room. Coats, underwear, long skirts, shirts, and messy clothes kept spreading. On the stairs, sexy high heels and a pair of men's leather shoes were casually thrown there. His Majesty looked at this scene and seemed a little surprised. He whistled and laughed. Is it so interesting? Moraid scratched his head and followed His Majesty to the master bedroom. Vaguely, an incomparably lazy and sweet voice came from the master bedroom. It was melodious, charming, and soul-stirring. His Majesty narrowed his eyes and laughed. Such a professional voice. It's really exciting. Chapter 852. The master bedroom was lit with a hazy pink light. The light was blurry and ambiguous. When the three masters, who stood at the top of the dark world, walked into the master bedroom, the battle between the man and the woman on the huge, luxurious, soft bed seemed to be about to reach its limit. From their point of view, they could only see the man's majestic back and the woman's messy hair. The man's strength and the woman's softness were perfectly blended together. In the blurry light, the content of this picture was not much, but it was rich enough. They were so devoted. So much so that they didn't notice that there were 3 uninvited guests in the bedroom. The hurried sound became a little chaotic as the battle became more and more intense. His Majesty clearly heard Moraid swallow his saliva. From this angle, he couldn't see the appearance of the woman kneeling on the bed, but just listening to the voice close at hand was enough to make people's blood boil. His Majesty didn't mind Moraid's performance. Instead, he chuckled and said, "Do you want to taste her, too?" No one knew when the clouds had become thin. His Majesty's voice passed through the domain, echoed in the bedroom, and rang in everyone's ears. The whole bedroom fell into a dead silence in an instant. At this moment, the bodies of the man and woman on the bed were all stiff. They were really stiff. They maintained their original movements and froze there motionlessly. The atmosphere suddenly became oppressive. Moraid grinned and said, "Yes." His Majesty nodded and said, "Approved." The woman, who had maintained her original posture, finally turned her head a little bit. A small face that could really be said to be as beautiful as a flower and jade appeared in front of them. It should have been a very young and pure face, but at this time, it was flushed, revealing a kind of charm that only belonged to women. Her eyes were big and beautiful, but at this time, her eyes were full of panic and bewilderment. She looked at the 3 men who suddenly appeared in her bedroom and shook her head hard. Her wavy hair swayed messily. Her voice was obviously trembling, but there was still a trace of sweetness left. You are, it's hard for me to explain who we are. There's no need to explain. It's not important. His Majesty laughed, and his voice was very gentle. Is this your man? The man who had been frozen in place suddenly came back to his senses, his body moving backward. The woman immediately snorted in a low voice. Under the ambiguous light, the woman's soft body simply made Moraid's mouth dry up. The bare-chested man quickly glanced at the 3 of them and found that they were all people he didn't know. He calmed down and then became furious. He said gloomily, "All of you, get out of here. I'm in a good mood today. I'll give you 3 seconds, otherwise, she's your woman?" His Majesty suddenly asked. The man glanced at him. He couldn't see His Majesty's face, but his intuition told him that His Majesty wasn't very old. He didn't think too much about it and frowned. "What? You're her classmate? Or is it that teacher by who is pursuing him?" He reached out and hugged the trembling young woman beside him. He said coldly, "Yes, she is my woman. You can get lost now." How self-righteous. His Majesty calmly said, "Gu Qianxuan will be very sad to know this." The girl's body suddenly trembled, and her flushed face instantly turned deathly pale. The man's face was also not much better than his. His face was livid, and his eyes looked extremely flustered. Ning Yunshui, female, 26 years old, postgraduate student of Northwest University of China. 3 years ago, you were valued by Gu Qianxuan and deeply loved by him. This villa is a gift from Gu Qianxuan. You even gave birth to a son for him. He is now next door, right? His Majesty whispered softly, Gu Feng, Code 043 in Kunlun City, an expert of the thunder-shocking realm. In terms of relationship, he is Gu Qianquan's distant cousin and also the bodyguard Gu Qianquan arranged for Ning Yunshui. In addition to you, Gu Qianquan also arranged a female bodyguard, codenamed Weed. You spent 2 years developing Weed into your mistress and made her loyal to you. She turned a blind eye to everything here and then began to do something to Ning Yunshui. 2 months ago, you spent the night here for the first time. In 2 months, you came here 53 times and almost became the hostess here. Am I right? He chuckled softly. I can see that you're addicted to it. Why? Is sister-in-law very fun? You, Gu Feng was extremely frightened. He originally thought that the other party was just a student or a young teacher of Northwest University China. He did not expect that the other party had a clear view of everything in the dark world and even checked their information clearly. If this was a trap, how long had the other party monitored them? And how could the other party deliberately pay attention to Gu Qianquan's woman? In 3 years, Gu Qianquan didn't spend the night here as many times as you did. His Majesty's voice was a little emotional. Gu Feng felt that these words were a little familiar. After thinking for a while, he remembered that this was what his sister-in-law had said not long ago. However, at that time, Ning Yunshui's tone was full of ambiguity and provocation, while His Majesty's tone was full of mockery. Who the hell are you? Gu Feng forced himself to calm down and asked in a deep voice. You can call me. Before the word, His Majesty, left his mouth, Gu Feng had suddenly made a move. The expanding lightning condensed in his hand in an instant. Gu Feng suddenly stood up and directly punched His Majesty's face. Perhaps the impact was too great and his brain was a little confused, or it was a dying fight. Out of instinct, he chose to kill to keep his mouth shut. Moraid tilted his head. Jianghu yawned. His Majesty was motionless. The domain, which was similar to starlight and mist, gently fluctuated in front of him. The starlight domain touched the lightning in Gu Feng's hand. Without a sound, the lightning disappeared. Gu Feng's eyes widened, and his face was filled with horror. His palm reached into the clouds and mist. A huge pulling force pulled his body directly into the clouds and mist. It was not tearing or shattering. It was melting. His body began to melt crazily the moment it touched the clouds and mist. His limbs, body, and brain. There seemed to be an unimaginable high temperature hitting his body. There was no blood. His body instantly turned into the most incorporeal steam. Ning Yunshui was obviously stunned. She held the quilt, and her body trembled more violently. His Majesty waved his hand casually, as if he had eliminated the last trace of Gu Feng's existence. He looked at Ning Yunshui and said, I don't want to kill you for the time being, but I need your cooperation. Do you understand? Ning Yunshui bit her lips hard. Her big eyes flickered, and she trembled and nodded. He's very satisfied with you. His Majesty patted Moraid on the shoulder and looked at the woman. Go take a bath. The woman wrapped herself in the quilt and trotted into the bathroom. She quickly came out. She was not a loyal woman to begin with. In order to live, she easily let go of everything she did not intend to hold on to. She went in quickly, and came out even faster. She was still wrapped in the quilt and lowered her head. She looked a little humiliated and shy. She came to Moraid's side and said in a low and soft voice, It's okay. Where are we? His Majesty suddenly asked. Jianghu looked at his watch and said slowly, We just passed Yinzhou and are about to reach the Beijiang area. It's still early. His Majesty nodded and glanced at Moraid. Don't worry. Moraid rubbed his hands. He looked at the woman standing in front of him with her head down, and then at His Majesty. What a shame. His Majesty scolded with a smile, stood up, and walked out of the master bedroom. Jianghu followed His Majesty. The two of them went next door together. A little boy of about 2 years old was lying in the cradle next door. He was sleeping soundly. His Majesty looked at him quietly and was silent for a long time. The muffled voice next door rang out again. His Majesty reached out and touched the boy's face. He whispered, "What a good bargaining chip. Will Gu Qianxuan compromise?" Jiang Guochu frowned and asked. "It's a matter of life and death. Who knows?" His Majesty said lightly, "He has a physical problem. He played too much when he was young. Although his physical strength is still abundant, his fertility is declining. It's an accident to have sex with Ning Yunshui. This can be said to be his only child, and I will give him a way to live. So, the chance of success is very high?" Jiang Guochu asked. "Success," His Majesty shook his head and laughed. "In fact, I don't worry about whether Gu Qianxuan will compromise or not. In my opinion, it is inevitable. I think that even if he compromise, will our plan succeed under his compromise?" "What's the variable?" Jiang Guochu asked. The voice next door made him confused. He waved his hand and closed the bedroom door. "Li Tianlan. Lin Fengting." His Majesty said calmly, "They are all variables and ruthlessness. So, slow, still too slow. Emperor Dong's palace is moving too slowly. Our people are also moving too slowly." Jiang Guochu was thoughtful and did not speak. Over Zhongzhou State, the transport plane of Emperor Dong's palace had rushed over the border of Yinzhou and officially entered Beijiang province. At the same time, Liaodong, Qiushui, Kanglan, and other places. Batches of elites from various forces began to officially enter Beihai. The hibernation plan turned into an awakening plan. Countless elites of Zhongzhou State lurking in Beihai began to officially move. His Majesty came to the northwest quietly and turned the most powerful bargaining chip at present into a trump card, waiting to be revealed at any time. Zhongyuan Province. In the number 2 private base of the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Wujin, who had been busy for a long time, turned off a switch in front of him with trembling hands. The open space was scorching hot. In front of him was a huge furnace. The temperature was rising. A screen hung in front of Dongqing Wujin. The screen was full of raging fire. A dark and majestic long sword was floating in the fire of the furnace and rotating slowly. It rotated with an indescribable frequency, as if it was clearly expressing some kind of desire. "You are longing for completeness," Dongqing Wujin whispered. "Unfortunately, you don't need me anymore." Xianyuan Feng in the furnace paused and then rotated counterclockwise, as if responding to something. "My task is done." Dongqing Wujin whispered and activated another mechanism. A crack suddenly opened on the top of the huge furnace. In the raging fire, the dark Xianyuan Feng flickered slightly and disappeared from the base in an instant. What completeness! Dongqing Wudi, the executive minister of the army headquarters, who was supposed to keep a close eye on the desert, stood beside his elder brother and waved his hand. A chilling layer of ice appeared beside Dongqing Wujin, relieving him of the scorching heat that was almost beyond the human body's limit. The essence of Xianyuan Feng is a murderous weapon. The murderous weapon comes from a piece of vital metal. It lost its spirituality because it was divided. But this piece of metal is not dead. It can also have emotions and its own will. This is a sword with life. Dongqing Wujin said slowly, "What I have been doing is to make Xianyuan Feng a real whole. I have succeeded, but only based on the number of murderous weapons now. Obviously, the current Xianyuan Feng is not the piece of metal back then. So?" Dongqing Wudi raised his eyebrows. "So it is pursuing real completeness. It is instinct. It is irresistible." Dongqing Wujin said slowly. Chapter 853. The bonfire burned in the mountain forest at night, dispelling the darkness and chill around it. The soft and melodious sound of the guitar rang out unhurriedly. Tents were set up around it, and more than a dozen young men and women surrounded the bonfire, enjoying a midnight snack. All of them looked like students. The combination of men and women was almost perfect. They snuggled up to each other, and the scene looked extremely harmonious. At the periphery of the crowd, a handsome young man stood aside, quietly looking at the girl playing the guitar, his eyes warm and calm. The girl played the guitar, smiling gently and brightly. The night wind blew her hair, and the light of the bonfire flickered. Her whole body seemed to glow. Senior, I heard that you and Xiaoxia plan to get married after graduation? A girl with light freckles on her face looked at the scene and asked with some envy. Your news is outdated. Another young student came over, stopped the freckled girl's shoulder, and whispered with a smile, Senior, you went to see a house with the class monitor a few days ago. It's a mansion of nearly 800 square meters. We don't understand the world of the rich. You still have the cheek to say that. The freckled girl rolled her eyes at her boyfriend. When are you going to take me to see a house? I don't want 800 square meters. Do you have a small house of 80 square meters? The boy smiled and scratched his head. The house price in my hometown is not so high, so I bought a big house. My family means that I'm just living off my parents, and there's nothing to be envious of. The handsome and gentle man smiled and shook his head. His eyes noticed a couple walking into the depths of the mountain forest. He frowned and was a little worried. Don't go far. It's not safe in the middle of the night. Don't worry, Senior. The girl's face was a little ruddy. She glared at her boyfriend next to her and giggled. With Xiaoxia here, there won't be any danger. The girl playing the guitar smiled and waved her hand, full of confidence. The boy shook his head and did not say anything. The freckled girl stood there and laughed when she saw this scene. Senior, Xiaoxia is a martial arts master. After you get married, I'm afraid you'll be bullied by her for a lifetime. She's willing. The young man laughed softly. The class leader shouldn't have entered our school, right? I've heard that her family is very powerful, and she seems to be very talented. She should have gone to Huading or Yuzhou. It's said that there's a special warfare academy there, and it's a mysterious thing. But she gave up the opportunity for her senior. Is that right? The freckled girl was curious. The young man's eyes became more and more gentle. He looked at his beloved girlfriend and did not speak. The guitar stopped playing for a moment. One more song, one more song. The surrounding young students began to cheer and applaud. The girl, whose strength was completely above everyone but was not arrogant at all, smiled shyly and gently. She glanced at her boyfriend, tilted her head, and said with a smile, Let's play another song. The guitar continued to play amidst the applause. The girl's voice was ethereal and sweet. On the banyan tree by the pond, she sang softly, but her sweet voice stopped abruptly in an instant. Everyone looked at her in surprise. The girl named Xiaoxua's face instantly turned extremely pale. Her gentle eyes suddenly became extremely frightened, and her whole expression seemed to be a little distorted. The young man who noticed this scene walked directly to her without thinking. What's wrong? Look, a meteor. The freckled girl suddenly pointed to the sky and cried. Everyone raised their heads. The night sky seemed to brighten for a moment. Through the sparse winter forest, at the end of the sight, a ray of light suddenly crossed the sky. No one knew how far it was. But everyone noticed the ray of light. The bright moon and the bright stars all seemed to dim at the moment when the ray of light appeared. The ray of light seemed to tear the sky apart and kept flashing at an unimaginable speed. The meteor crossed the night sky. The next moment, the ray of light had flown over their heads from the very distant night sky. A colorful line seemed to be vaguely left behind in the night sky. The next second, the ray of light went away in a flash and disappeared directly from everyone's sight. So beautiful, after an unknown period of time, someone murmured softly. Then, his body subconsciously trembled. Everyone suddenly felt so cold. The whole forest and the whole world seemed to be filled with a kind of ghastly coldness. The girl named Xiaoxua, who should have entered the Sky Academy or the Deep Sea Academy a few years ago, collapsed in her boyfriend's arms and had no strength at all. The meteor had passed. But her eyes were still terrified to the extreme, and she couldn't say a word. Ordinary people might just feel very cold. But she knew very well what this coldness meant. This was sharpness. Unparalleled sharpness. Yan and Zhao valued martial arts. As a barrier near Yuzhou, Yan and Zhao's martial arts had always played a very important role in Jianghu state. One of the double walls of Sai City, Drifting Cloud, the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Hua Qingfeng, the sect master of the Shadow Sect. Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang sword master of Mount Shu. The enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai. And so on. Many of the roles of the backbone of the special warfare system in Zhongzhou state were from Yan and Zhao. Yan and Zhao did not have a famous martial arts force in the dark world like Jade Pool and Mount Shu. But in such a large province, there were many martial arts families. The masters of the families were at least experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, and many of them were in the thunder-shocking realm. When these people gathered together, their strength was extremely impressive. The martial arts of Jade Pool and Mount Shu was about cultivation. But the martial arts of Yan and Zhao was about competition. All the qualified martial arts families in Yan and Zhao province would have a competition every once in a while. This was also the famous elite martial arts competition in Yan and Zhao. To be exact, it was held every 3 years. And the time of the competition was at the end of the 2 academies, which was the winter of the year before graduation. The elite martial arts competition would select some of the top winners and send them to the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. There was no threshold for the competition. Regardless of life or death, everyone who knew the news was qualified to participate. The scene was huge, but it was extremely chaotic and time-consuming. But this was the way Yan and Zhao had always selected the top elites. In Shanghai City, the elite martial arts competition had lasted for nearly a day. From day to night, the selection of good and bad had come to an end. The rest was the battle between the elites. On the edge of the huge martial arts arena, the patriarchs of many families sat there with different expressions, waiting for the judges to count the results. In the middle of the patriarchs, an old man looked at his grandson standing in front of him with a smile and whispered, "You did well today. Keep it up." "Yes." The young man nodded calmly. "Junzi is really good. In this generation, his strength can be regarded as the top, and he is no worse than his brother." A middle-aged patriarch beside the old man smiled and said, "By the way, Junzi, I heard that your brother is doing well in Emperor Dong's palace. Is he going to break through to the peak of the fire-flaming realm?" He turned to the old man with an imperceptible flattery in his eyes and said with a smile, "Mr. Qi, when your grandson becomes a senior in Emperor Dong's palace, don't forget us ordinary people." "Don't say that." In terms of martial arts talent, the 2 brothers are really. The old man's laughter suddenly stopped, and the next moment, he suddenly jumped up. His movement was so violent that he staggered and almost fell to the ground. A few seconds later, almost all the patriarchs of the aristocratic families stood up in shock and looked at the sky in the distance. There was a light in the distant night sky. From south to north, the bright and almost dazzling light kept flashing in the sky. 1 second, it was on the southern edge of the city. The next second, it had directly penetrated the sky above the entire city. The sharpness that could tear the sky and the earth passed the martial arts practice field in an instant with awe-inspiring coldness. That was indescribable majesty and arrogance. At this moment, all the patriarchs of the martial arts families in Yan and Zhao froze on the spot and did not dare to move. From south to north, the light almost flew over the sky of Shanghai City in an instant and then disappeared in the distance. The whole martial arts practice field was dead silent. Everyone was immersed in the flash of light. It was not shock. It was real fear. When fear reached the extreme, all the senses would become extremely pure. There were people at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and Mr. Qi was an expert a half-step to the invincible realm. However, everyone only had one thought when facing that ray of light. Their pride and willpower seemed to be completely shattered under the light that could tear the sky and the earth. Everyone only had one feeling. Small. Just like a real nonentity. If the height of that light was lower, the unparalleled sharpness could tear the whole city apart. What is that? A patriarch struggled to open his mouth, and his hoarse voice shocked even himself. I don't know, Mr. Qi, who had the highest realm, said. Then he shook his head and said in a deep voice, the invincible realm. He said the invincible realm. Not the invincible realm. The meteor flew through the sky and went straight into the sea. Shanghai City was left far behind in an instant. The dazzling light kept flashing, splitting the surface of the sea. Amidst the monstrous waves, each flash of light traversed an incomparably long distance. Yan Zhao quickly fell behind. The light was extremely bright and unimaginable. It entered Qin Island with extreme brilliance. The glorious night view of Qin Island passed in an instant. The more dazzling light flew over Dongshan province. Flashing and trembling. A perfectly straight afterimage appeared in the sky. The light in front was more and more dazzling. The target of the flowing light was clear and direct. It flew over the mountains, the wilderness, the plains, the city, and the sea, and went straight into the hinterland of Dongshan. Far in the distance, a bright light lit up. At the extreme speed, the faint light in the distance suddenly became bright. It wasn't a big city. Under the blurred lights, the whole city looked so leisurely that it was almost unorganized. This inland city was called Qingzhou. The flowing light flashed and suddenly became extremely dazzling. It was so small, but so dazzling, as if it had the supreme glory. In the next second, almost everyone in the city of Qingzhou saw this ray of light. The light crossed the sky, with thousands of meters of light, and directly covered the whole city in the blink of an eye. Falling stars and falling moons. It was extremely dazzling. It disappeared in an instant. There had never been such a majestic and dazzling light in the world. The brilliant sword light was unparalleled in the world. Chapter 854. The whole Qingzhou city was in an uproar. The light was so bright and gorgeous that it covered the stars and illuminated the night sky. The bright lights and neon lights were completely dimmed. It flew across the sky and suddenly seemed to be the only color in the world. Then it disappeared over Qingzhou city. Or rather, it fell. Everyone was extremely curious about what it was and where it came from. And why it disappeared over Qingzhou. The process was extremely short. But someone happened to take a photo. In the vast night sky, the colorful light appeared in the photo, and it seemed to amaze the whole world. As a senior astronomy enthusiast, He Shui could be said to be one of the first people to discover the light. She saw the light through the telescope she bought with a lot of money. It was so clear and yet so blurry. The professional telescope barely captured the constantly flashing picture of the light. She couldn't see what was in the light, but she could appreciate its posture more clearly than most people. It was as if it was gliding through the night sky with grace and speed. Every time the light flickered, it would cross thousands of meters of the night sky, leaving an unimaginable trail of light in the air. It was moving forward in a straight line, so focused and so persistent. The light flashed and disappeared in an instant. He Shui was a little upset, and then she became a little excited. She picked up her mobile phone, opened the address book, and sent a voice message to her best friend. Mutong, did you see that? That meteor is so beautiful. It should be a very rare meteorite. I have a video here. If you didn't see it, I'll send you a copy. Li Mutong on the other end of the phone did not respond. Because the meteor was standing in front of her at this time. He Shui might be one of the first people to discover the meteor. But she was definitely not the first person to feel the meteor. Wang Yuetong was. Or in other words, a few thundershocking realm experts in Qingzhou were the first people to feel the meteor. It was not a meteor. It was sword light. Pure sword light. The sword light was so condensed, pure, and perfect. It flew over Qingzhou city. Li Mudong felt the terrible oppression and coldness at the first time. In front of this sharp edge that seemed to be able to easily tear everything apart, she did not have any thoughts of resisting. She had never been to Eastern Europe, nor had she seen the real heavenly sun of the world. Her perception might not be accurate, but the Howren's sword light that flashed across the sky seemed to have surpassed her father's in her memory. Her eyes widened in horror, and her face turned pale. The little girl named Tide was sleeping soundly in her arms. She was gently wrapping her fingers around herself. Through the window of the living room, she saw the sword light flying directly toward her house. The windows in the living room were instantly shattered. There was no clear sound. The sturdy glass instantly turned into the finest powder without a sound. The sword light flew into the living room and appeared in front of her. Li Mudong's body tensed up and she subconsciously hugged her daughter tightly in her arms. Her mind was in a mess. She bit her lips and didn't know what to say. She couldn't figure out how the other party had found him. He didn't know who the other party was. He had no idea what the other party was here for. Her eyes trembled slightly. Holding the child in her arms, she finally became determined. There was a black shadow in her sight. The rainbow-colored light was slowly dispersing around him. The black shadow became clearer and clearer. It seemed to be a person, but his entire body was wrapped in a long black trench coat, and the black trench coat was covered with the black trench coat was embroidered with countless complicated and gorgeous golden patterns. A big hood covered his head. Li Mudong could only see the coat. It could be said to be the most gorgeous and majestic coat she had ever seen. But she couldn't see the person in the coat. She bit her lips, holding the child, and looked at him stubbornly. Her eyes gradually calmed down, and they were a little gloomy. The black shadow was also silent. His eyes fell on the little girl in her arms, and he was motionless. It seemed like he was surprised, stunned, dazed, and nothing at all. She couldn't feel any emotion from him. He seemed to be emotionless, quiet, indifferent, and steady, like the deep sea or the abyss. "Who are you?" Li Mudong asked slowly. Her voice was calm and clear, without a trace of trembling. The black shadow moved and took 2 steps forward. "If you take 1 step forward, I promise you will only see 2 dead bodies." Wang Yuetong said calmly, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you want to do. But you can't get anything from me, and you can't use me to threaten my family, and him." She held the daughter in her arms, with deep sorrow in her eyes, but she became more and more determined. The black shadow froze on the spot, and he seemed to be at a loss. Li Mudong was stunned. In her sight, the black shadow slowly raised his palm. His movement was very slow. Maybe he was afraid of causing some misunderstanding, so he was very careful. With a slight tearing sound, a finger-sized hole appeared on Li Mudong's leader. A glimmer of light left Li Mudong's leader and stayed on the black shadow's sleeve. The pale silver light kept spinning and jumping in the black shadow's hand. It was extremely eager and excited, and it seemed that it couldn't wait. Li Mudong looked at the pendant she had been wearing for almost 2 years, and her heart suddenly ached. However, her body gradually relaxed. Because of the pendant's reaction. "Are you one of his people?" She forced a smile, looked at the silver light jumping on the black shadow's sleeve, and said softly, "It does belong to him. If he wants to take it back, you can take it." The heartbreaking sword of the 13-story building. 2 years ago, he put the heartbreaking sword on her, and it had never left him until now. Li Mudong watched it fly into someone else's hand. She was in a daze, and no one knew what she was thinking. The black shadow lowered his head and looked at the heartbreaking sword in his hand. At this moment, Li Mudong could clearly feel his emotions from him. It was hesitation, and longing. The black shadow moved and seemed to look at her, then at the heartbreaking sword, and then at her again. After repeating this for nearly 5 minutes, he raised his palm. The delicate heartbreaking sword floated in the air, shining with silver light, beautiful and cold. A subtle but extremely strong light appeared in the black shadow's palm. The light wrapped the heart-breaking sword. The shattered heart, which had been trembling all this while, suddenly stopped. The exquisite little sword suddenly emitted an incomparably sharp aura. As if it had been waking up from a long sleep, the sword energy of the heart-breaking sword was extremely strong in an instant. The black shadow looked at the heart-breaking sword. The heart-breaking sword moved slowly and carefully, stopping in front of Wang Yuetong. "What do you mean?" Li Mutong looked at him in surprise. "It belongs to him. I don't need it. You can take it away." The black shadow was silent and motionless, just looking at her quietly. The black clothes wrapped him so tightly that Li Mutong couldn't hear his voice or see his expression. She only saw him raise his sleeve and point at the child in her arms. "Tide is my daughter." Wang Yuetong suddenly screamed and held the child tightly. It seemed that because she was holding the child too hard, Tide's little body trembled slightly, and she struggled to cry. The black shadow was obviously a little flustered. He raised both sleeves and waved them randomly. A stream of air appeared in the living room. The gentle and steady stream wrapped the little girl. Li Mutong stretched out her palm. Tide, who was in distress, came directly to the black shadow. "No." Li Mutong seemed to have completely broken down in an instant. "Give my child back to me." Her voice was a little desperate, with a hint of pleading. The black shadow looked down at Tide. The big one and the little one looked at each other. From this angle, the little girl seemed to be able to see his face. No one knew what the little girl saw. Tide's crying gradually disappeared, and then she giggled very happily. The black shadow bent down and looked at Tide floating in the air. He hesitated and raised a finger. Li Mutong looked at this scene nervously. His finger slowly moved down and finally fell on the little girl's eyebrows. A perfect and dreamy light suddenly bloomed from his finger. The light enveloped the whole living room. Wang Yuetong stood up subconsciously, trying in vain to stop something. Tide's laughter was still ringing in her ears. In the colorful light, it looked extremely dreamy. The light expanded and then faded away quickly. Tide's laughter didn't stop, and he sounded extremely happy. Li Mutong's palm slightly sank. The little girl returned to her arms, and a little hand grabbed her neckline. Li Mutong was relieved and held the little girl tightly. The light disappeared completely. The black shadow was still standing there. His aura had obviously dropped by a notch. Li Mutong was stunned and looked down at her daughter in her arms. There was a tiny but extremely beautiful mark left between the little girl's eyebrows. It was like an almost imperceptible diamond-shaped crystal, shining with colorful light in the light. Her fingers gently touched the crystal, and she felt warmth. But inside the crystal, she clearly sensed a sharpness that could destroy everything. If this was an amulet, it could be said that this amulet was unique in the whole dark world. Wang Yuetong looked at the black shadow in a daze. She couldn't refuse such a gift, because from this moment on, her daughter had a power that no one could hurt her. Her rosy lips moved, and she whispered, "Thank you." The black shadow, whose breath had obviously dropped, stood there blankly. He didn't look tired, and he just quietly looked at Tide in Li Mutong's arms. "Don't tell him." Li Mutong whispered, "I'm begging you. Don't tell him." The little girl in Wang Yuetong's arms giggled and reached out her little hand toward the black shadow, as if she wanted to grab him. The black shadow took a few steps back. Li Mutong was stunned and stood up subconsciously. In her sight, the black shadow backed out of the broken window, and suddenly fell from the 5th floor. That gorgeous black windbreaker spread out in the air to its heart's content. The 4th floor, the 3rd floor, the 2nd floor. Flashing. A stream of dazzling flowing light suddenly lit up the entire Jianghu. The flowing light flew high in the sky and appeared in the sky that Li Mutong could see. Then it flashed again and instantly left the Jianghu city. All the way to the north. Chapter 855. Zhongzhou state was moving. Beihai was also moving. The real chaos began when North Sea wiped out all foreign forces. Wang Xingxiao's statement that those who entered the border of Beihai would die fully explained what it meant to say that attack was the best defense. The fall of the four major generals was just the beginning. The ubiquitous undercurrents had quietly swept across the entire North Sea. Blood, battles, conspiracies, and betrayals began to play out sporadically in every corner of the North Sea. Wang Xiaoyao had let go of his scruples and began to fight with all his strength. The strength he had accumulated for many years began to be exposed little by little. Not only Mount Dibbing, but also the 7 major sword-holding families could clearly feel that there would be big and small problems in a certain link of his orders. In the eyes of ordinary people, Beihai was still calm. But those who stood at the top could clearly see the turmoil and chaos. Orders to recall experts from all over the world were sent out one after another. More and more experts returned to the North Sea. There were teams, individuals, and all sorts of talents. Little by little, the foundation of North Sea was being exposed. It was not the madness of a dying struggle. All the actions were orderly. Beihai was getting more and more chaotic, but the actions on Mount Dibbing were clear and definite from the beginning, with a kind of beauty of order. As the only and last disciple of Xie Ji, Huangfu Qiushui, the daughter of this generation of the Huangfu family, was also officially summoned back to the North Sea. This girl, who once had the courage to fight with Li Tianlan at the same realm, had now become an influential figure in the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao were equally young. But the world had changed, and they were already standing on the highest stage, facing countless sabers and swords, and hidden thunder above the 9th heaven. They were very young, but they were already somewhat out of touch with true youth. When the influential figures of the past reached the pinnacle, there would always be younger people to replace their positions. Huangfu Qiushui was one of the best. At the age of 20, she was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. In both academies of Zhongzhou State, she could be said to be a veritable goddess-like figure. Huangfu Qiushui did not return to Beihai alone. Instead, she brought along a small team she had set up in the Sky Academy. The team was called Kuanglan. The word Lan had caused a huge controversy in the Huangfu family, but Huangfu Qiushui had also displayed an extremely tough attitude. She didn't care what others said and directly decided on the name. Currently, there were only 7 people in the Wild Tide squad. 5 fire-flaming realm experts. 2 thunder-shocking realm experts. The one with the highest realm had already stabilized the realm of the thunder-shocking realm. But the number 1 expert of the Wild Tide squad had always been the captain, Huangfu Qiushui, who had not yet entered the thunder-shocking realm. The whole team came to Beihai. If there were no accidents, the violent squad would also become part of the Beihai Corps after graduation. All the internal members would change their household registration and become a member of Beihai. They would be completely absorbed by the Beihai Corps. Huangfu Qiushui would also move up in the Beihai Corps. In the future, if she wasn't the patriarch of the Huangfu family, she would definitely become a Corps senior who controlled all the forces of the Huangfu family. The violent squad would become the core force of the Huangfu family and have nothing to do with Zhongzhou State from then on. From a certain point of view, Chen Fangqing was right to think that Beihai was a cancer of Zhongzhou State. Because over the years, Beihai had indeed taken a lot of things from Zhongzhou State, including technology, talents, and resources. Although they had also given Zhongzhou State generous returns, it had been going on for too long. Whether it was fair or not depended on one's mentality. A situation similar to the Violent Tide squad would happen to the graduates of each session of the 2 academies. Before the appearance of Emperor Dong's palace, Beihai had always been a popular choice for many elites. Zhongzhou State carefully cultivated elites, and a large number of people would enter Beihai every session. Their popularity was even higher than that of Kunlun City. Among such a team, Huangfu Qiushui's Violent Tide squad could be said to be the most outstanding one. It was also the most blatant one. They returned to Mount Dibbing as soon as they received the order. Then they returned to Qiushui City from Mount Dibbing. The task of the Kanglan squad was very simple. They helped the Huangfu family to stabilize the order of Qiushui City in the worst case. The worst case, Huangfu Qiushui thought for a whole day. She only thought of 2 words. The worst. Wang Xingxiao told her the worst. She was the disciple of summer solstice. She could be said to be Wang Xingxiao's junior sister. It might not be appropriate to call her junior sister, but Wang Xingxiao, who had spent most of her time in Mount Dibbing, undoubtedly regarded her as his sister. Therefore, Wang Xingxiao explained the conversation between them very thoroughly. The word worst also brought her endless pressure. In her memory, even throughout the history of Beihai, the so-called worst case was rare, and it could even be said that it had never happened before. What had Zhongzhou State thought about? How fierce would the so-called game be this time? She returned to Qiushui City and her family and thought for nearly a day and a night. The night was about to pass. Huangfu Qiushui, who hadn't slept all night, was a little sleepy, but her mind was still confused. She shook her head hard, got up, put on her clothes, and walked out of the door. Outside the door it was an extremely secluded little courtyard. The 2 Thundershocking Realm experts of the Violent Tide squad were guarding the door, seemingly acting as bodyguards. Seeing Huangfu Qiushui come out, the older man with the highest realm turned around reflexively and said, "Captain. Go and have a rest." Huangfu Qiushui said quietly. Her voice was a little distant, with a sense of distance. "Where do you want to go, Captain? Let me accompany you." The man scratched his head and laughed. His code name, Guardian, was given by himself, and he changed it the moment he saw Huangfu Qiushui. He had never concealed his crazy infatuation and pursuit of Huangfu Qiushui, but Huangfu Qiushui always kept a distance from him. Relatively speaking, her attitude toward the other team members was closer than that of Guardian. "I'm going to the family ancestral hall," Huangfu Qiushui said blandly. When she said the ancestral hall, she seemed to think of something. Her light and almost holy face blushed slightly, and she subconsciously raised one hand to touch her face. Guardian's eyes were hot and almost obsessed. He also wanted to touch her face. His greatest wish was even to be able to touch Huangfu Qiushui's face. But as soon as his fingers moved, he withdrew them awkwardly. Huangfu Qiushui noticed his eyes, frowned slightly, and said in a cold voice, "Get out of the way." Guardian took a step back in embarrassment. Huangfu Qiushui walked past him, and her footsteps were a little hurried. The family ancestral hall was the only place she could think of that could calm her heart. Guardian took a deep breath, looked at Huangfu Qiushui's back, and his eyes were a little sad. "You're a toad trying to eat swan meat. You're lucky to live until now, and you still want to hit on the captain here? I'm afraid you haven't woken up yet." Another expert of the Thundershocking realm in the Wild Billow squad laughed. "What do you mean hit on the captain? I like her, and that's my right." "You should have forgotten the captain's sword," the Thundershocking realm member said with a faint smile. His code name was Tsung Lei. Different from Guardian, he joined the Wild Billow squad to join the Wang family of Beihai. His biggest dream was to make a name for himself in the Beihai Corps. Guardian narrowed his eyes and said blandly, "The captain is really strong. But I'm close to the peak of the Thundershocking realm." He was close to the peak of the Thundershocking realm at the age of less than 30. In any case, he could be regarded as a genius. This was also the reason why he dared to express his love for Huangfu Qiushui. At his age and today's achievements, no one dared to say that he had no hope of reaching the half-step invincible realm or even the invincible realm in the future. Idiot. Tsung Lei curled his lips. "I'm talking about the captain's sword, not her strength. Don't you know the characteristics of the Wang family of Beihai's martial arts? Today's patriarch is very strong, but he's strong in the wind and thunder veins. Beihai's martial arts focus on momentum and the foundation. How much strength can a normal expert of the fire-flaming realm exert? Unless they're in an explosive state, which is the characteristic of Beihai's martial arts. If time goes back, even His Majesty Wang Tianzong would not be her opponent at the captain's age. Pure Beihai's martial arts should still be stabilizing the foundation at the captain's age. What are you trying to say? Guardian frowned. Haven't you heard that rumor? Sung Lei's smile was a little weird. He was from Beihai. Although he didn't belong to a sword-holding family, his family was considered to be above average in Chushui City, so he knew the truth of some rumors. The foundation of the captain's martial arts is in Beihai, but today's kendo is approaching that, which is different from Beihai's martial arts. Guardian's face changed slightly, and then he forced a sneer. Hearsay. Don't forget my background. Sung Lei's tone was a little superior. He glanced at his companion and said playfully, I heard that when that person swept Beihai 2 years ago, his first battle was with Choshui. The first sword left by that person was left in the ancestral hall of the Huangfu family. Captain is going to the ancestral hall now. What do you think she's going to do? When that person swept through the North Sea, Captain followed him for a period of time. I heard that His Highness was very optimistic about Captain. Who knows if it was because of her talent or something else. TSK, that's why I said that you're lucky to be alive until now. Guardian clenched his teeth. His face was livid and a little pale. With a slight sound, Huangfu Qiushui pushed open the door of the ancestral hall. The faint but awe-inspiring sword energy came to her face. It was a little cold, but Huangfu Qiushui was very familiar with it. There might be thousands of rumors. But there was always one that was right. That was, Huangfu Qiushui had indeed gradually moved in another direction from Beihai's martial arts. In 2 years, her physical fitness was unlikely to support her to enter the thunder-shocking realm, so she spent most of her time simulating, imitating, and then practicing continuously. Many people felt that her sword energy and fighting style were becoming more and more like Li Tianlan's. This sentence was right, but not completely right. Most of the time, she imitated the sword intent of Tianguang's sword. Tianguang's sword was left in the ancestral hall by Li Tianlan. It was a part of the 13-story building, with Li Tianlan's sword energy on it. The perfect integration of the two was as profound as the sky and the sea for Huangfu Qiushui. Her increasingly fierce sword energy was an imitation of the sword energy on Tianguang's sword. She occasionally thought of the man who could carelessly touch her face with his feet. Thinking of his sword light and his rudeness when he conquered Sister Yuetong in front of her for the last time, she had mixed feelings. But here, she could indeed calm down in the fastest time. She took a step forward and closed the door of the ancestral hall. Buzz. In the subtle sound, the quiet Tianguang's sword trembled slightly, looking a little happy. Huangfu Qiushui was a little curious and took a step forward subconsciously. A black shadow suddenly appeared in her line of sight. Huangfu Qiushui was startled. Her whole body suddenly tensed up, surrounded by sword energy, as if facing a formidable enemy. The black shadow stood in front of Tianguang's sword with his back to her. The gorgeous and mysterious black windbreaker looked extremely majestic. His palms seemed to be touching the hilt of Tianguang's sword. Huangfu Qiushui didn't know when the other party came in. She didn't even know why she didn't notice the other party just now. The other party had his back to her and was quiet. Huangfu Qiushui subconsciously shifted her gaze. The black shadow was still there, but it disappeared in her perception in an instant. It was extremely illusory. It was as if it really was a phantom. Huangfu Qiushui naturally knew what it meant. It meant that the other party was at least an unimaginable master for her. In people's impression in the entire dark world, there seemed to be only one person who could do this. Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He was more real than heaven and earth, but more illusory than the air. You are? Huangfu Qiushui gritted her teeth and asked slowly. The black shadow moved and slowly turned around. He raised his head. Huangfu Qiushui suddenly opened her eyes, which were full of spiritual energy. Her eyes were a little nervous, but there was also a kind of joy and surprise that she might not even be aware of. Under the black hood, in the slightly swaying candlelight in the ancestral hall, there was an extremely young and clean face. His appearance was a little blurred in the dim light, but it could still be seen that he was not handsome. That clean face could only be said to be delicate. The most eye-catching thing was his temperament. That was an indescribable temperament. At this moment, there were only 4 words in Huangfu Qiushui's mind. Peerless beauty. It turned out that a man could also be described as peerless beauty. He was like the sun, dazzling. In the dark ancestral hall, his whole body seemed to be shining, perfect like a dream. Huangfu Qiushui looked at him in a daze, and suddenly remembered the scene when she squatted in front of him and wiped his feet for him 2 years ago. She remembered that the other party rubbed her face with his feet. It was a little moist, a little warm, and a very humiliating action, but she didn't feel humiliated at all. Huangfu Qiushui's eyes were a little intoxicated, then turned into astonishment, slowly into surprise, and finally became unfamiliar. That face was still so clear. But she seemed to be sure of something. You are not Li Tianlan," she whispered. The face in her sight was indeed Li Tianlan. His figure and appearance were exactly the same. But what was different was that he was too eye-catching. In her impression, Li Tianlan was very calm, but in his calmness, there was a strong sense of confidence and desire, or ambition. And the Li Tianlan in front of her, he was also very calm. But his calmness was extremely indifferent, with a kind of real indifference and carelessness. Huangfu Qiushui could feel the arrogance behind this calmness. Extreme arrogance. It was a kind of look that looked at everyone as an ant. Peaceful, indifferent, dignified, superior, insufferably arrogant, and supercilious. It was an indescribable overbearing, restrained to the extreme, but it made people feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. In her sight, Li Tianlan shook his head and then nodded. He could understand her words. His current appearance might not be the current Li Tianlan. But it was Dong Huang in the deepest part of his memory. Dong Huang at his peak. Huangfu Qiushui glanced at him blankly, and then subconsciously looked at the sky light beside him. The sky light seemed to have completely dimmed. The sword energy belonging to Li Tianlan was still there. But the sword energy belonging to the 13th floor became extremely weak. Huangfu Qiushui was slightly shocked and suddenly turned her head. "What did you do to him?" It was completely silent. Huangfu Qiushui's hair suddenly stood on end. There was nothing in her sight. Except for the sky light and candlelight. There was only a row of spirit tablets of the Qiushui family. And Li Tianlan, whom she had just seen, had long disappeared. Huangfu Qiushui suddenly rushed out of the ancestral hall. At the same time she rushed out of the ancestral hall. The Black Shadow had left Qiushui City and came to the front of the old site of the Qin clan in Port Tongtian. There was also a sword here. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.